Hey everyone, how's it going? This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, joined by my usual partner in crime, Scott Schultze. Scott,
yes,
we are just past one of the busiest weekends in NFL football and on the NFL calendar. How you doing, my friend? I know you're not asking me. I'm asking me. If you'll be noticing I'm drinking a pink drink tonight because that is airborne because I've got a little bit of a cold. So busy weekend for me, busy weekend for the CincyJungle.com site. But it's also another busy episode for this program. But in general, whether it's with what the Bengals did last weekend or your own personal life, my friend, how are you?
I'd say good. I mean, it is pretty exciting because when I go to work, I see the farmers out there working the ground, which means it's spring and it's warm and it's, we don't have frost every day. So I know you've probably been like that for like 10 years, but
yeah. What are farmers? We don't really have those in Southern California.
Frost. You probably want to get frost.
Yeah.
So yeah, weather-wise, things are doing good. Yeah, the draft's over. So another 360 days or so, and then we get to jump into that again. And so overall, things are looking good.
Good. And I'm glad. I know, it's always funny when I do these podcasts, either with yourself or previous podcasts or others. Everybody, because I'm the Bengals guy in Southern California, weather is always a topic. But I'm glad to hear, because I know April seemed to be a very fickle month in terms of the Cincinnati area, the Ohio area, in terms of weather. So I'm glad to hear that. Seems like the sun is shining a little bit more.
Yeah, the Bengals local market had a horribly cold winter. Many below freezing days. And then even March and April, like your transition days weren't really transition. They were just a continuation of winter, which I guess is why they call it climate change, not global warming these days, because it didn't seem like there was any warm. But
there's always something, right? There's always a phrase for it, right? Yeah. All right. Anyway, yeah. Yeah. Did I silence you with the political talk? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. But we're not talking about global warming, climate change, any of that. We are talking about the Cincinnati Bengals, what they did last week in the NFL draft. 3 days, 11 picks, and a slew of undrafted free agents that they've added. To me, Scott, first of all, I guess we should look at each of the picks and just kind of review everything that happened. Round one. And first of all, I want to say thank you to not only CincyJungle.com because they kept up with a number of different posts throughout the weekend, and hopefully you kept it there. Aside from just announcing the picks, there was analysis, there were social media reactions, there were, how does it affect current players on the road, all kinds of stuff. But aside from that, I want to thank the listeners of this program as well, because we posted some of the videos from Cincy Jungle that myself, Rebecca Toback, and others did on our channel, and we got a massive amount of watches on that, massive amount of listens on that. So thank you so much for watching and downloading that. If that was you, if not, then shame on you. You really disappoint me. But at any rate, the Bengals drafted, and I'm going to try and get all of these here. First round, Billy Price, Ohio State. They drafted second round, a little surprising, but not really. Jesse Bates the third, the safety out of Wake Forest, a ball hawk type of player. Sam Hubbard, another Ohio State in the third round, defensive lineman, a guy who's versatile, not necessarily super explosive or what have you, but a guy who probably will fill in that Chris Smith role. And I'm sorry to say that to those of you who want Michael Johnson out of the door. I don't see it. Malik Jefferson, one of the more athletic linebackers in the draft. And I got to give credit to our upcoming guest, Cody Toomey. And I think I said this at the top of the show. He's going to be joining us in just a little bit to talk about his experience at the draft. But I think he was one of the guys who pegged Malik Jefferson in the third round to the Bengals. So the Bengals grabbed him. Little bit of a surprise in round 4, Mark Walton, the running back out of Miami. Round 5, Devontae Harris, the cornerback. Andrew Brown, the defensive lineman, defensive tackle out of Virginia. Darius Phillips, another versatile defensive back with a lot of return and or playmaking ability. Logan Woodside, the quarterback out of Toledo, correct? In the 7th round, Rod Taylor, a guard, and Auden Tate, a very, very interesting wide receiver from Florida State in the Bengals at the very end of the draft. So, Scott.
Yes.
As we have reviewed all of those guys, talk about what the Bengals did. We'll talk in a minute about favorite picks, least favorite picks, all that stuff. But talk a little bit about what the Bengals did with the picks. The fact that they kept, in a sense, they kept all of their picks, which may or may not be a surprise to some. And, what just your overall impressions of this draft class for the Bengals.
Well, I think the one thing kind of tying into that is that there's a whole lot you can really pick up from what the Bengals are telling us. And I think they kind of tell us who they are and what they believe about their team by how they pick and who they pick. And I think one of the keys we saw in the draft was our view of what their needs were not the same. The Bengals staff basically had a very different idea of what their needs were versus what most of the fans, what the national media kind of felt their needs were. Last year, I think we would agree the offensive line was, pretty well atrocious. Probably league worst, one of the league worst, if not the league worst. They had, issues obviously with the boy he at left tackle, Bodine at center, right guard Trey Hopkins, and then right tackle with, just a handful of people, Andre Smith, Jake Fisher, et cetera. And so I think a lot of people figured, okay, they're going to take a lineman early and often, 1, 2, maybe 3 guys. You have 11 picks. If you keep all 11 picks, we're going to see them take a lot of linemen. Instead, we only saw one. We saw one lineman taken in the first 6 rounds of the draft. And that, granted, was the very first pick, Billy Price, because Bodine had left for Buffalo. They had no center. They obviously had to have someone to fill that role. So you could say it was a solid pick because they did address a need. But I think a big surprise was, they then went defense, running back, defense, quarterback. They just didn't have a lot of emphasis on a position. And so I think right tackle was one that really floored a lot of people, because that means you are either looking at Bobby Hart, who struggled with the Giants, and they let him go. Apparently he has some attitude issues, is not very hardworking, is kind of maybe a cancer in the clubhouse. You have a guy, Jake Fisher, who is coming off a major surgery, has had heart issues. You have no idea. I mean, you hope he's better and hope, he's able to play, but you just have no idea what you're going to have with him. Oboye, who struggled at right tackle and left tackle, who they declined the option on, who obviously I can't see him starting. And then you have, Kent Perkins, which is kind of a shot in the dark at this point. So the fact that between Pollock and Lewis, they kind of said, yeah, we're pretty well set. We only see one guy that brings us an upgrade. So that was a huge surprise. The other huge surprise, I think, was no kicker in the draft with 11 picks and with the whole debacle with Jake Elliott last year. But yeah, reviewing the draft, I thought it was fairly solid. It was kind of what the Bengals do. They don't always go for need. The first pick's usually need, but after that, they, someone like Sam Hubbard, they obviously drafted Willis last year. They have Dunlap and Johnson, but that looks like a move, for the future, because Dunlap and Johnson are both free agents after this year. Guys like Mark Walton, obviously they have Giovanni Bernard for 2 more years. Joe Mixon was a rookie last year. So you kind of see some of his people, they have 3 defensive backs. And so it's not a lot of guys that are going to step in and play day one. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. If you look at the guys they took, other than possibly Jefferson and obviously Billy Price, most of these guys are probably going to be rotational guys, if that. And I think the other thing I'd say is very telling was the selection of Jesse Bates, because if you look at the safeties on their rosters, guys like Fedulum and Sean Williams and Iloka, all 3 of them are better as run defenders than they are deep safeties. They're definitely better, in the box playing the run. They aren't Reggie Nelson. Reggie Nelson was very good in coverage, and I think that's one thing that Jesse Bates brings them. And they kind of acknowledge that, hey, we have 3, fairly decent safeties, some good cornerbacks, but none of these are a deep safety, kind of a safety. So it was very interesting. They used that pick. I don't know how high people had him. He was someone I was really hoping they'd get, but I was thinking around 3. So obviously they had a higher grade on him. But yeah, I'd say that was my basic takeaways without getting too deep into any of the specific picks.
So there's a lot, and by the way, I mean, we can touch on a little more about the kicker and offensive line situation. You mentioned Billy Price, and then basically waiting to the end of the draft to draft another offensive lineman. Those were two questions we had right off the bat tonight about our listener questions, and if you have some listener questions for Scott, myself, and then when Cody comes on later in the program, please submit them in the YouTube chat at cincyjungle.com, in the comment thread, what have you. We want to answer those. We're going to try and get those at the end of the show. But Carlos Andre, and I think it was Phil Upton, if I'm not mistaken, was the other one who had mentioned about kicker, about offensive line that came our way. You're right. And what I don't know, you kind of mentioned, Scott, that you think that maybe some of these guys will play, maybe they won't. I saw in our live YouTube chat, and I want to get your specific thoughts on this player, because to me, this is one of the most exciting players to me in the Bengals draft class. And I want to kind of back up for a second and say, for those, usually this time of year, the Bengals get insane grades in their draft class. Usually everybody's talking about what they did, the value they've got, the best player available strategy, all that. Again, I want to reiterate, as we've done on this program and on cincyjungle.com, this was a meat and potatoes draft. This was, I don't want to call it boring, but this was defensive line. This was offensive line. This was linebacker. This was, a couple of defensive backs that have returnability. This wasn't wide receiver heavy. This wasn't, what 2017 was, so it wasn't edge rusher driven, all of that. So I think people, when you want to grade the draft, if you want to do that right now, you got to be a little cautious of that. Christopher Higdon live in our YouTube live draft said solid B+ draft. Now here's where I want to get your thoughts, Scott. Zachary Stemple said Jefferson, meaning Malik Jefferson, the Texas linebacker, very athletic, a guy who can defend the pass pretty well. Not a thumper, but can, chase and tackle well, keep things in front of him, something that the Bengals struggled with, especially on third down last year. Jefferson will start day one because of Vontez's suspension, says Zachary Stemple. Royal Flush 513, another good friend of the program, said Jefferson won't start ahead of a healthy Vincent Ray and Preston Brown. So I guess my question to you, especially for that player, will Malik Jefferson be a guy? Yes, I think in general in 2018 he's going to be a rotational guy. There's no doubt about that. A guy that they bring in sub packages, pass defense. I view him as kind of a more NFL savvy, NFL ready Emmanuel Lemur, a guy who can defend the pass well, has a higher upside, can be a very good player. But do you see him, given the Bengals' preference for veterans and the locker room continuity of Vincent Ray and all that, do you see Malik Jefferson kind of withering away his rookie year on the bench behind some of these guys?
Yeah, I think not only Jefferson, I think a lot of them are going to spend a lot of time on the bench. Basically, everyone not named Billy Price, I think, is going to start the year as a backup. And I think guys like I can see Hubbard, I can see Bates, I can see Jefferson, all coming in on offense, defense. Or well, I guess they're all defensive guys, so not offense. I can see them all coming in on defense. Rotating in, kind of what they did with Willis last year. He kind of had a role. They kind of slowly brought him along. I can see, someone like Hubbard in that same role. I can see Jefferson kind of coming in, kind of like what we saw with okay, my mind's drawing a blank right now, but the Jordan Evans, the kid from Oklahoma who was kind of a similar guy. He's athletic. He's maybe not the most day one ready to play, but he does have some good traits as far as the athleticism and some of the things he can do. He can get to the ball carrier. And we didn't see him play a whole lot later in the year. He kind of played a little more, and same thing with guys like Andrew Billings, and they kind of slowly got in. So I think a lot of these guys, that the ones that make the roster, I think it's going to be the same thing. I think they're going to, the first four weeks, we're probably going to see him very sparingly, then maybe in sub packages and, due to injuries. And, as the year goes on, we'll see him a little more. I'd be very surprised to see Malik Jefferson starting, short of just a slew of injuries. I think, guys like Evans, Hardy Nickerson, Preston Brown, obviously perfect. He's healthy. I think Ray, at least this year, Vinny Ray, some of those guys, I think all will have a spot ahead of him. And I think one of the reasons probably is with Malik Jefferson, the big knock on him is he's super athletic, but maybe not the most instinctive. Up until his last year at Texas, really didn't seem to play up to his, 5-star, high school potential. So I think the coaching is probably looking at, hey, it's a super athletic guy. He finally had a good season. Did the light click? Maybe it did. Let's, get him in practices, kind of get him on the field, kind of a little bit here and there, and get him to a point where we trust him. Because Marvin Lewis has said before, he doesn't trust rookies because they can make mistakes, they get burned. He doesn't know what he's going to get. Of course, he doesn't know what he's going to get because he doesn't play him. But I think someone like that who may have a lot of upside just isn't going, because we saw the same thing with Carlos Dunlap his first few years. They didn't put him in because even though he looked great when he was out there, he just kind of had to earn Marvin's trust. And I see that with a lot of these folks. They're going to have to earn Marvin's trust, which comes very slow to rookies. And we saw that with John Ross last year, top 10 pick, and he wouldn't even play the guy. So I'm going to say, very, very, very sparingly we see any of these guys other than Billy Price.
Interesting. And I think that whether or not that ends up coming to fruition or not, I do like that, yes, the Bengals addressed, immediate need in the first round, and you can say, and myself included, I thought it was a tiny bit of a reach. I don't necessarily think Billy Price would have been there at 46. Stranger things have happened. There were some guys available at the top of the second round, Will Hernandez, etc., that I did not think would be there. So some things could have happened where he landed, but I would have liked to seen them maybe move back and then move just kind of work the draft a little bit. Move back in the first, get Billy Price, get another pick, work some things and get the guys that they maybe – now, we don't know, but all of the smoke signals that we saw said Frank Ragnow was their guy, and he went one pick before them. And, of course, then the Bengals, one pick later, went Billy Price. So maybe they had those guys very closely rated. That's fine. And I don't necessarily, if you read my Twitter and all that kind of stuff, I had kind of knee-jerk reactionist type of things. And I still think Frank Ragnow is the better long-term prospect than Billy Price. But I think Billy Price is a very nice consolation prize. Now, you're talking, Scott, about these guys who may or may not play early on in their career with the Bengals. That's one of the quote-unquote changes that may occur with the team, with Marvin coming back, playing these young guys, not playing them, whatever. What I do like, though, is the fact that, Cincinnati has always been, yes, let's trust the veterans and all of that. However, they drafted a lot of guys at specific spots that are pushing veterans. Jesse Bates, that he was a higher pick than either of their starting safeties that they currently have. You've got Chris Hubbard, a guy who, yes, will probably be replacing Chris Smith, but might be pushing the other veteran defensive ends for more time, as well as Carl Lawson from last year, Malik Jefferson. I mean, now you have guys that are competing, and I think that that's what this team needs. It's not to rest on its laurels, so to speak. It's to breed competition at spots, even if the spots don't necessarily need more help on paper. So that's what I like. I don't know if you feel the same way, or if Scott, you may think that some of these picks are just kind of, luxury / hate to use the term, but waste.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. All these picks, and kind of was saying earlier, as far as none of them really starting the first year, they, in a sense, you look up and down at what they drafted and you look at their roster. I mean, yeah, there's not a lot of massive holes other than line or offensive line and linebacker, but it's not like they, they're a team like the Browns that have deficiencies everywhere and had to make all these trades and to draft all these guys and bring in all these free agents. That these are guys that I think that, the first year they're going to provide a lot of solid depth, and they're going to compete with the guys they've taken over the last couple of years. And you kind of hope that, in 2-3 years, these are your starters. These are the guys that, because the Bengals were that core group that they drafted back in 2010 and 2011 that kind of built up that team that had that nice big run of playoff wins. Guys like Atkins and AJ Green and Andy Dalton and Carlos Dunlap and so forth. Those guys are all getting older. Those guys are hitting 30, 31, 32,
Yep.
And some we can't have. I mean, it's great. It's been great having them for 7, 8, 9 years, but we aren't going to have them forever. And at some point, they are going to get that point where they're just not as productive, and you need that next group. So it's kind of nice to see that they didn't necessarily focus on one or two absolute needs and kind of throw everything out the window, but they are kind of building up a solid core. And this is a meat and potatoes draft. It's they're shoring up a lot of kind of a broad scope of positions with the idea that, hey, these are going to be the guys that kind of funnel through, and you're going to see these guys kind of take over the reins as the other guys get older and maybe leave in free agency. And the one thing that you mentioned, I agree. I was very surprised they did not make more. Well, I shouldn't say surprised. I was hoping they'd make more trades. They even said beforehand, we have 11 picks. Obviously, not all 11 making the roster. You'll see us be more aggressive. We'll work the draft, and of course, that didn't happen. That's not really Marvin or Mike Brown's philosophy. They don't do that. They just kind of
and what they do in the second round, they moved back. Back. We're joined in it looks like by our special guest, and before we get to him, Scott, I'm curious to know, of the 11 picks that the Bengals made, who was your favorite pick, Scott, of the group? Whether it's, hey, they'll play right away, big impact, overall value, combination of the factors. Who was your favorite pick that the Bengals made in 2018?
The easy one would be Billy Price, because he fits a huge hole, because I've been a very anti-Russell Bodine guy for many years since I drafted him. But I'm going to avoid that and go a little deeper. I'm going to say Darius Phillips, the 5th round pick. And the only reason I say that is from what I've seen, and I went back after the draft and tried to watch a lot of video of these guys after they took them. If he's the guy, if I correctly watched the right videos, I was really impressed with his ability to cover guys, to make plays on the ball, lots of pass breakups. I mean, he looked like a legit. I don't know if he has the right speed and size that would have gotten him drafted higher, but he did a lot in those videos. It really made me think, wow, this is and he was like the 3rd defensive back they took too. It wasn't even like their first one. So he's a guy I'm really impressed with. I'd like to see, in 2, 3, 4 years, what he becomes as a Bengal.
Yeah, I believe that's the young man who had all kinds of returns for touchdowns, correct?
I think he's the one who was kind of like the touchdown guy that every time he touched it seemed to go to the house.
Yeah, I remember tweeting out something. I think he had 14 overall touchdown returns in college, which is absolutely ridiculous. Whether it's defensive back, return man, whatever, absolutely ridiculous with the ball in his hands. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza. I'm joined by my usual co-host, Scott Schultz, and we are talking about the 2018 NFL Draft, who the Bengals took, who are some of their best picks, what they do in 2018, and all of that good stuff. And we are joined by our good friend and semi-co-host on this program, Cody Toomey. Cody went to the NFL Draft in Jerry's World because he has the luxury of living in Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas. And obviously, you went – what's kind of cool, Cody, to me, you went as both a draft analyst and a fan. So aside from just the reason, aside from, your knowledge, but the reason I wanted you on specifically for this episode, and thank you for making the time, by the way, your draft knowledge, your Bengals knowledge, but also your experience in Jerry's World and at the draft, because many of our listeners and many people associated with this program, including myself, have not been able to attend a draft, have not been to Jerry's World. So I guess let's start with the event itself. give us your impressions of the event, how Jerry's World did. I'm sure they did a great job. And, your experience as a draft / Bengals fan while you were at the event this weekend.
Yeah, so it was really fun, and I think they did a good job of kind of making it for families. So like my wife and son went Friday or Thursday when we were there for a little while, then they left, and I stayed with my brother-in-law for basically, I think we stayed till the Panthers pick, and then it was starting to fizzle out. They had like 25,000 people inside, and it was standby only. You couldn't buy tickets. So you basically had to sign up, and then when you got there, it was proximity located. So you could check in once you were like within like 100 yards of the stadium, so that people couldn't just like get up in the morning, check in, and then when they got called for standby,
bail and then come back type of thing.
Right. So you could bail and come back and track. It was actually pretty cool. There was an app, and you could live track what position you were in the standby line, and it would update like every 15 minutes. So it'd be like you're number 9,000, whatever, and it just would keep going down. Obviously, as the draft approached, the number didn't go down anymore because once people left, they couldn't go back in. So once it like got within like 10 minutes of the draft, you pretty much didn't have any movement of that standby line until like pick 15 or so, when people started to kind of fill out. And then once Dallas picked, it just kind of emptied out because they all were pissed that they picked Leighton Vander Esch. But I mean, it was funny. Like I kind of had a good idea that was who they're going to pick. I know some people that are pretty in touch with the Cowboys, and my brother-in-law was like, "Who are they going to pick?" I'm like, "If this linebacker from Boise State's there, I've heard that he's going to be the pick." And sure enough, he gets picked, and just everyone just starts booing, like, "What are they doing? We need a receiver. Pick Calvin Ridley. What are we doing?" Everyone's a draft analyst, but it was cool. I mean, there were people. I would say, obviously, there was more Dallas fans than any. Surprisingly, there was a lot of Rams fans there and Raiders fans. So I don't know if it's like the short flight, so they made the trip because it's the closest it's been to them. Because, like you said, most people haven't been able to attend a draft because when it was in New York City, that's a tough go. And then they had even less seating. So it was like basically people would camp out for 2 days to get in, which is not what they wanted here. And the same way with Philly, that's East Coast. So maybe it was the closest to the West Coast. So there was like a lot of Rams and Raiders fans. And I would say every other fan base kind of had, equal support. There was a dude I saw like at 12 o'clock, I think it was Goodberry tweeted like, "Dude's all in." It was some big dude. And he had changed his jersey to say Ragnow. And then I saw him there at like, probably at 5:30, and he's still smashing beers. And like, Ragnar's all in on this. So I don't know how disappointed he was when that pick came through, but it was cool. I mean, they had like 26 football fields worth of stuff. They had like the bungee run. They had an obstacle course for kids. They had a flag football thing where you could basically sign up. For kid was between like 5 and 13. You just sign up. All of it, the whole thing was free. Parking was free. Everything was free besides like food, like obviously concessions.
Ancillary stuff probably.
Right. But everything else was free. Parking was free, which I was surprised. My wife's like, "Yeah, it's free parking." I was like, "Oh, I would have totally paid like $30 as we were driving in." They're still selling parking for people who didn't know.
Right.
And then you could sign up your kid, and then they would get 10 minutes, and then they called them coaches, but a lot of them were like former players or practice squad dudes for the Cowboys or other teams that kind of like let them play flag football and stuff on this little turf thing that they had built there. They had like the old Lombardi trophies there. They had a music concert stand where they're just playing music at all times. They had like these bedazzled helmets from each team and some like little notes on every team. So it was pretty cool, like all the different little things they had. So it was probably like 2.5, 3 hours where you could just kind of walk around and just see all the different stuff they had. And then they had like the vertical jump and the 40-yard dash, which was cool. I mean, just watching random people run the 40-yard dash is like pretty freaking amusing because it's like some people like take it seriously. You could tell like it was like two dudes that were pretty fit and they were like racing each other. And then it was like sometimes it was like dad and his 2 kids and it's like
6'4". Yeah.
Yeah. It's like he's just like I gotta get to the finish before I collapse. Yeah. But it was fun, and they had like a hologram behind you. That it was like I think it was Chris Johnson. So basically, when they would say go, it would start and run his like 4-3 whatever. So it was like you'd see people run and just like that thing just disappear from him. You're like, that's the difference between 4-3.
Oh, why wasn't it John Ross?
Yeah, I think they didn't have the graphic yet. You know, it might not have been Chris Johnson, but it was like basically somebody running like a 4-3-4 or 4-4 or something like that. And then like you see these people run like 5-1, you're like, that's pretty fast. And then you see how much further that graphic would finish ahead of them.
Way behind, yeah.
There's a big difference between 0.6. That's when you're like, when you see a receiver, you're like, I ran 4.7. He's going to get drafted later. You're like, what's 4.7 for 4.5? I mean, it's like the 0.2 tenths is like a big space.
Big difference. Yeah.
But I think the party was cool. Everyone was talking about how like the vibe in Philly was so much more like party vibe. But I think with Dallas, it was so big and spread out that there wasn't like consolidated groups of people. So I think that was like one of the things that some people complained, but I enjoyed it because there were like multiple monitors. We walked behind the NFL Network and the ESPN broadcast were just right there. So you're just standing behind them. They can kind of see you on TV. And it was cool because you could hear them on the broadcast and they had like a monitor to the side that had what was being shown on the TV. So it was really cool, and it wasn't crowded because they had so much space. So, but yeah.
Good experience overall. Fun experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool that they made everything free. There was a lot of people there that you were like, a family with like 3 or 4 kids, like, dude, that could have cost $100.
Yeah.
I'm sure they spent, all day there. Maybe they spent $100 in food, but at least it didn't cost them $250, So, because, I mean, parking at the stadium for regular games in Dallas is like $50 to $100.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, if you don't have parking passes or season tickets, you got to park near the stadium, and it's basically $50 minimum. So it's pretty expensive. And, that was probably one of the first chances some of those people had to come and get inside the stadium. Because, I mean, the standby tickets on Saturday when I went back, I clicked into the standby and I was first on the list. I could get right in. So awesome. It was cool.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you had a good time. And, it's a lesser scale, but I went to, just because it was so close to where I live, I went to a Rams training camp. I think it was not this summer will have been 2 years ago.
Right.
And they did it at UC Irvine in Southern California.
Anteaters.
Yeah, Anteaters. And, it was like $10 to park, and that's it. Yeah, you buy your food and whatever, but and it's on a college track and field course. But you know what? It was cool, and
cool.
And that's kind of what I mean. Aside from, I want to obviously get your draft thoughts as well, but aside from that, I was very interested when you told me you went to the draft. Not necessarily, and you were kind of doing it for your own press in terms of data, draft analyst, data analyst, all that kind of stuff. But as a fan,
man, it was fun. I mean, and it was fun, like hearing people, like being there when Baker Mayfield got announced was wild.
So that's where I was going with my first. I mean, I want to know more. I want to know everything about the draft and your experience there. But that's where I'm going. Before the Bengals stuff, I want to know about Baker Mayfield, the reaction there, and your reaction to that, because there were rumblings about it earlier in the day. I still thought, you know what, Hugh Jackson, USC guy, he's got to just pull the trigger on Sam Darnold.
I don't think Hugh has much say anymore.
I don't think so either. I think
John Dorsey made the pick. I think John Dorsey's thinking he's the only guy that's going to walk into this locker room and grab it by the horns and maybe change the atmosphere of this locker room. And I'd heard some stuff the day before from people that I trust, and they were like, yeah, it's still Donald. 2 days before, and it's like, it was like, it's still Darnold, and Vegas still had Baker at 1,000 to 1, and I had put some money on Darnold, and I was like, man, even if the whispers are true, like, I'm going to hedge my bet. So I made a nice chunk of change in the fact that Baker did get picked, so I was excited about it getting announced. But yeah, I mean, as the rumblings came in, everyone was there. It was like, no, it's going to be Darnold. They're going to pick Allen and Darnold and Allen. And no one believed it was going to be Baker. And then when they read Baker, the crowd was just like, oh. And of course, you know, everyone's like, hey, Baker, oh, Brown's going to Brown. Terrible idea, terrible pick. I like Baker. I think Darnold's probably the safer guy to right the ship for them. But if you're at Cleveland and you've been awful forever, like, swing for the fences. If you think he can be Drew Brees and he's your guy, then take your guy. You know, the thing is, the last 3 years have been building up to this pick. They keep trading down, stockpiling, you know, picks. And, you know, this pick's going to either change their franchise for the positive or they'll be back and where they are in 5 years. But, I mean, as a Bengals fan, I'm nervous. If Baker is anything of what he was at Oklahoma, they have a ton of early picks now. He's got weapons now, a myriad of weapons. He's got Carlos Hyde, Duke Johnson, and Nick Chubb as running backs. Landry, Josh Gordon, maybe. And Antonio Callaway, a first-round talent, probably, maybe at least second-round talent. But I worry about him and Gordon together. I mean, I thought it was cool, man. I mean, but, yeah, I mean, if you're the Browns, you swing for the fences. I mean, you've been terrible so long. What's it make the difference, you know? Like, if he's your guy, then take him if you think he's going to take the locker room over. So it was cool, though, man, just hearing his name announced. And it was like, it was off to the races, you know, because then everyone's like, it was cool because everyone in the crowds, who's going to go next? You know, some random guy in a Packers jersey who was probably like 60, like, walks up to me. He's like, hey, overheard you and your friend there talking. Seems like you know what you're talking about. Like, who do you think's going to go next? You know, and it's like, and there's like, you know, groups of people were just kind of huddling in between the picks. It was cool. It was cool.
Well, so Cody, I know my co-host has some questions for you as well, but you know, I do kind of echo your sentiments a little bit in terms of, hey, watch out for the Browns, not necessarily a playoff team or whatever, but maybe, you know, maybe a 6-win team this year that could be scrappy.
3 wins this year.
You know, I still think my choice is always Darnold number one. I thought he was the best quarterback, and maybe, you know, you can argue ceiling, floor, all that kind of stuff. I think he is the most just dynamic / maybe ready to play. Whatever. He was just my number one overall guy. But if they didn't go him, Baker was probably my second guy on that list. So, you know, I kind of kind of did a little jokey to them on Twitter. But, you know, I do understand the Baker pick. I don't understand why they passed on Chubb. Maybe I know they're deep at that position, but that seems to me, if you get Darnold and you get Chubb, that's a pretty good combination. Or if you get Mayfield and you get Chubb, pretty good combination. Whatever. Let's focus a little bit on the Bengals here, though, Cody, just for the sake of time. Sure. Your thoughts on you know, what just general thoughts. I think my colleague has a couple of questions for you, but your general thoughts on what the Bengals did with their 11 picks. Are you surprised they kept all those picks? Do you think that a good chunk of these guys are going to play in 2018 in a variety of roles, or is this going to be more pine writing type of stuff, even though Marvin has promised change, quote unquote?
Right. I mean, I think obviously Price is going to play all the snaps if he's healthy, right? He's going to be cleared for training camp. We've never heard that before.
Yeah. with this medical staff, right?
Right. Luckily, his doctor cleared him, not ours. But I think Bates is going to play a lot more than people think. I think it's been pretty obvious this team has wanted an upgrade at safety, and it's not that they don't like their safeties, but one of the nice things about the safeties they had was that they're both kind of similar and they can flip-flop. Bates is not like either of them. He's a free safety. He's a ball hawk. He's a center fielder type, not so much a guy that you're going to want in the run game, which will allow them, when they play big nickel, to play both of their safeties plus Bates. So I think Bates will probably see 400 snaps, maybe more. I mean, they'll be a nickel 70% of the time, so 400 to 500 snaps probably for him in their big nickel. And then I think Hubbard's takes Michael Johnson's role, or I guess most of that would have probably been Chris Smith last year. So I think he takes their role. I think he sees probably 500 to 600 snaps in that role as well. And I really think Michael Johnson is going to get cut in training camp. If he gets in the tub at all with the nagging injury again, I could see them just letting him go. That room's full, and at this point, are you really going to pay him, $6-7 million to be your 150 snap guy in the middle? I don't think so. So I really think Hubbard might be the ending of the Michael Johnson era, and then Malik Jefferson's interesting. I think he might actually get a lot of playing time too, because they just, with Vontaze being suspended and their just lack of athleticism on the linebacker core, if he plays well in the preseason and training camp, I could see him getting some decent snaps, and he brings them something in the linebacker core they don't have. He's uber athletic. He didn't really cover much at Texas, but I don't think that means he can't. It either means they didn't ask him to, or they weren't comfortable with him there. But with his athleticism, if he can be taught that, he can be a really big asset. The problem with him is he's kind of like a bull in a china shop, and he's super athletic and flies around. But sometimes, you're like, what are you doing? You're not near the play because his instincts aren't as good as some of the others. So I am with Scott there. I think one of the better picks is Darius Phillips. I think he comes right in. He might be their nickel corner of the future. They might let Denard walk, and he might be that if he plays well. And then the guy they got from Illinois State as well might end up getting a lot of playing time too. Devontae Harris, because of his return ability, he's got some of that as well. So I think both of those guys might carve out a nice niche and play pretty early. Andrew Brown, I think, is a huge steal for the future for them, playing 3-tech. Virginia is just coaching staff just completely foolish playing him as a 5-tech defensive end instead of a 3-tech in defensive tackle. So he's really similar to Geno and his build and such. So I think, not this year, but going forward, he'll be a nice backup, and he'll probably get some snaps next to Geno this year. But in going forward, he really helps them in that sense. But overall, I think they just kind of played it safe. Last year was taking some, fantasy players in a sense, the skill positions all over, and this year was we need some help in the trenches, in the front seven, and the offensive line. I was surprised they didn't take 2 offensive linemen, but at the end of the day, I think they played a little bit of chicken. I think they thought some of these guards were going to slide because the class was so deep and that teams would push them down. And it turned out they took a safety, and then the safeties ended up being the position that people kind of bailed on until the 3rd round. And I don't think the guys that they liked in this, that range as guards and stuff made it. So I was excited to see them make a trade. I think there was a smart trade to move down and move up. I don't think they get Jefferson at 100. If you look at kind of what happened between 77 and 100, a lot of really good athletic players went. Apparently the Patriots called and tried to trade for that pick. Duke already had the ticket in his hand, and Belichick wouldn't give him a little bit extra like he wanted. So he said, we're going to stay and make the pick. So I was excited to see them being on the phones and at least entertaining some calls, except for the 1st round. They did not entertain calls in the 1st round. I have that on pretty good information. And if you heard any of Billy Price's interviews, he said that they were on the phone with him when the Lions were still on the clock. So you're not taking offers when you're already telling the guy you're picking him before you get on the clock. So.
Cody, says Scott Scholes in, as Anthony mentioned, I have a couple questions I was going to throw at you. First one is more about your experience there. And as a Bengals fan, I guess, down in Texas, which I assume is not a hotbed of Bengals activity.
Surprisingly, it's fairly big because we're so close to TCU and Dalton. a lot of Dalton fans end up kind of quasi like kids like Dalton. So then there'd be like a lot of kids with Bengals, but like you said, not a lot.
So I guess my first question is kind of related to that. Is your experience there? Was there much representation, like I guess at the stadium, as far as people in Bengals uniforms or even watching the Bengals pick? And did it draw much interest, or because it was a center, was it kind of like, or just kind of what the take was on the Bengals selections?
Yeah, so during the day, there were quite a few Bengals fans. And, when I first got there were some Dallas fans that heckled me. And then it was funny because then their friends came up and were like, hey, we're sorry. He's really drunk. And I'm like, it's 4:30. Like, dude's been at it. But yeah, so then I was like in the afternoon, a couple Bengals fans, I've been looking for another Bengals fan. But there was probably a couple hundred at least that were there. And then by the time the Bengals picked, there weren't as many, but like you said, it's kind of just they picked a center. People knew it was needed, but then it kind of didn't have that sizzle where people were like, So everyone was kind of just like, I get it. No one was really like too far one way or the other. Yeah, I mean, it was cool. I mean, every pick there were people there in reaction. It was really cool too because when they would cut to commercial, guys like Charles Davis, Jeremiah, Mike Mayock, and those guys would turn around and start talking to the crowd. Of course, Aikman would just start really stoking the fire, getting the crowd going up, and then they would start chanting Troy boy, and then he would get his ego stroked. So, but it was cool. I mean, basically every time they cut to commercial, they would all like stand up, come up to the rail, and start talking to people. So, but yeah, there was a fair contingent of Bengals fans. I would say Bengals are probably in the top 10 of teams represented here. Like I said, a lot of it's like kids love Andy Dalton. Their parents don't really care. So they're like, sure, I have a Bengals Dalton jersey. And they're like, I like Dalton. It's like, oh, you're a Bengals fan? No, I like Dalton. It's like, well, you have a Bengals jersey on. No, I like Dalton. Like, you can have them. But I didn't say that.
So what are you had said something earlier to Anthony that kind of got me thinking, talking about kind of knowing who the picks were. I think a lot of us, you mentioned, I think a lot of us kind of knew that Ragnow was probably the Bengals pick, and then Price was probably back up. And you mentioned some of the picks before that people kind of knew. And I know last week it kind of came out that Lapham had basically picked the same thing, and he has a long track record of kind of basically nailing the Bengals pick. But since he is a national, it's something that obviously is easy to find nationally. Sure. As far as what he's saying, do you think and looking at the Lions taking Ragnow right before the Bengals pick, you go back a year or two where Will Fuller is taken, the Texans move up right before the Bengals. Do you think he's like a pitcher and like tipping the Bengals picks, and maybe these teams who are targeting these guys once they see his pick are moving or staying or doing something to kind of snatch that guy that he's kind of telegraphing or giving away?
I think so. I've seen it on Twitter multiple times that I think the Bengals need to really shore up their war room and not let so much information get out, because teams aren't stupid. I mean, the dude has basically told them the pick, even in the years when the guy was taken, when he said it was going to be Will Fuller. If not, a guy to watch out for was William Jackson III. Like, he's obviously getting to see the board, or he's talking to the scouts, and one of the scouts are like, here's a couple guys. Now, most people won't bring that out 2 days ahead of time. Like, Dallas media people aren't going to be watching at 5 o'clock for what the Bengals beat writer guy might say or Bengals broadcast guy might say. But a day ahead of time, I mean, that's easy. Have one of your scouts follow it, right? And I don't think it's anything to be unnoticed that teams keep jumping and taking guys that he's saying. And I think it hurts. Not only does it hurt them on their ability to get the guys, it really hurts them on their ability to trade. Like, if you're the Bengals and Ragnow's there and somebody calls you, you call and say, hey, we want to move down. And they're like, well, and you're like, we're going to take Lamar. Like, the other team's going to be like, okay, take him. We'll be worried about you taking him, because they know they're not going to. So I think it hurts them in two ways. And I think, the Patriots were trying to get up to that pick. So there were multiple teams, I think, that knew Ragnow's floor was 21. And, if you're the Lions and you don't have that information, maybe you try to move down. Maybe somebody calls you, like Tennessee was trying to come up. So maybe Tennessee calls the Lions and comes up, takes takes Rashaan Evans, and then Ragnall's there, if they don't know you're going to take it. So, yeah, I think it hurts them in the long run. But yeah, it is what it is. I mean, they're not going to probably change their ways. I think the Browns showed how much you can change by, I think the last year or so, Dorsey's been leaking stuff to people and seeing who's his canaries are, and he's no longer giving those canaries any information. So, yeah. I mean, I think I mean, like Marvin said, what good does it do for you to let any other team know who you're going to be picking?
Right.
It doesn't do any good.
And you know, in the draft, there are so many smoke screens, or so it just we know how this whole thing goes. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. Scott Schulte is my co-host, and we are joined by our semi-co-host, Cody Toomey, who was in Texas and was in person at the NFL draft in Texas, as well as being a draft analyst and focusing in on what the Bengals needs and or what they have done so far this year. There's so many different routes I could take this here, Cody. I guess I'll go real general again. Your favorite pick by the Bengals and your least favorite pick by the Bengals last weekend. I think Scott said we didn't get to his least favorite, but I think he said his favorite was maybe the safety, Jesse Bates out of Wake Forest. He is an OSU guy, so he does like Billy Price and Chris Hubbard. But your favorite and least favorite picks for a variety of reasons. Again, need, value, play right away, whatever. Your favorite and least favorite picks by the Bengals this weekend.
All right, so my least favorite pick is going to be the fact that they didn't make any trades, right? They're not going to get 11 guys onto this team. So now all three of your late seventh rounders, you're looking at practice squad players, right? And I'm not telling them they have to trade all 3 7s to get up to the 6th, which they talked about maybe doing to get Logan Woodside, who ended up making it to them. But the thing is, if you don't make any moves, you make it so hard for those guys to make the team that if they're any good in camp, someone else is going to take them from you, right? Or they're going to be on the practice squad. Then next year you draft again and you're in the same boat. So I think probably the least favorite pick for me would be Rod Taylor, because at that point, what are you going to get? Okay, my thing is your offensive line is weak, and if you're trying to get a priority free agent, and he's probably going to want to come here more than a lot of other places because you might actually have a chance to make the team. I think you could have gone with another position, like maybe a wide receiver, take 2 of them, or take a linebacker like Tigray Scales, somebody who's an athletic linebacker, another position that you're weak at, versus, I don't know that he's ever going to make this team. He just seems kind of sloppy and lazy. I would just rather at this point roll with the guys you have, and at some point, your priority looking at that position early next year anyways. I mean, let's be honest. The right side of the line is going to be addressed early next year anyways, because either Jake Fisher is going to play well and get a contract, or Jake Fisher and Christian Westerman or Alex Redmond are not going to play well, and they're going to have to fix both holes. So I don't know. I mean, I just think that not packaging some picks so that you have less picks was foolish. The best value pick for me would be Andrew Brown. I think he can really be a good help as a 3 technique for this team going forward. And backup Geno, play next to Geno in the pass rushing or the NASCAR package, which I mean, I think this year you might think their NASCAR package might be Geno, Andrew Brown, which playing in 3 technique at the Senior Bowl, he was unblockable, just like Geno is. So Geno, Andrew Brown, and then Carl Lawson and Dunlap and Willis on a 5-man package where Lawson's going to play out on the edge, Willis and Dunlap on the end, and Geno and Brown in the middle. All 5 of those guys can hunt. And then you probably have like Tez and Malik, or Tez and Vigil as your linebackers to kind of play coverage. But and then I would say probably my favorite pick, to be honest, would be the Sam Hubbard pick. I think he's got something about him where his motor is great. I think he's something that this team could use because he's a tryhard that probably doesn't have the best athleticism. But if you look at certain things that make edge rushers great, one of those things is called the 3-cone, right? He had an elite 3-cone score, which means his agility is off the charts, which means if he's in the backfield and the quarterback's moving, he's not just going to whiff, which so many times we see guys get there and miss that tackle. So he's more likely, I think, to be able to turn the corner and square a guy up and actually make the sack. So I think he fills a huge role, and I think, based on value, he's pretty good value there. I know they considered him with the pick where they took Jesse Bates. So you get him a full round later, I think it's pretty good value. So, and he's a Moeller High School guy, which I know you're not from the area, but he basically grew up in Cincinnati, grew up a Bengals fan, won a state championship there, won a national championship at Ohio State. Not that stuff makes any difference in the pros, but the fact is,
it doesn't though.
Right.
You can sit here and you can say, high school, college. I mean, but you're used to winning.
Well, he's a winner, right?
Yeah.
And I think the thing is, too, if there's anybody that I'm going to put my chips on that's not going to flake out, it's going to be him. All his friends and family are there. He doesn't have to move to a new city and have, whatever they go through. Sometimes these players go through depression. They've lost their friends. They're in a new city. It's just his life isn't going to change. And he's going to have all his friends and family that he's going to be trying to show, that, hey, this is my lifelong dream. He's going to want to – if there's anybody that wants to break the playoff curse, it's him. He's never seen the Bengals playoff win, and they're his favorite team. So I think that does have some factor in whether I think he'll succeed. I just think he'll give everything. You're going to get max effort from him from day one of training camp and on. So –
yeah, I think he's one of those guys, and you can call him Justin Smith light or, a Chris Smith type of player, a guy who is versatile, a guy who is coachable, a guy who can play the edge, can kick inside on passing downs.
Safety in high school. That's how little he was.
Athletic guy for sure. And, I was not necessarily a fan of the Bengals. And it's not. I don't dislike Ohio State or anything like that. It's nothing like that.
You're a USC fan.
Well, you
probably don't like Phillips since he took one to the house against your Trojans.
I don't really care. I mean, to be honest, I really don't. There are some rivals of SC that I've watched a lot of, and people are so high on. Justin Reed was a very good player, but I saw some things that, I think he could be a pretty good player. I don't think he's going to be outstanding. I saw a lot of things and heard a lot of things about Josh Rosen being out here that worried me.
Right.
And whether they're warranted or not,
right?
There are things.
Is reality, right?
Yeah, and there are a guy who was hurt, a guy who kind of
concussions are a real concern with him
for sure. But a guy who also kind of took it easy as the draft approached and said, I'm just kind of not going to play, and I'm going to kind of blah blah blah. I think he's extremely talented, but there's a heart issue. There are some issues to work out there. Now he may very well be, and I can even grow. He may very well be the best quarterback of this class. I'm not debating that. I'm just saying there are things up front that worry me about him, and it's not the cockiness, it's not the arrogance, there are some other things that are kind of and I guess that kind of plays into some of the concerns, but it's not, I'm the best quarterback in this class. Well, you gotta have that swagger. It's more about,
there's a lot of baggage that's unknown with him, I think.
Yeah, exactly, and that's kind of where I'm at.
NFL teams, if they think you can help them win, they'll take down a lot of baggage, right?
Yeah.
But it's just little stuff like Darius Geis, the stuff that came out about him and him saying, none of that stuff happened. Well, it doesn't have to be an actual altercation with the Philadelphia Eagles. you come in and teams don't think you're interested. Perfect example, Geno Smith was known to like check his phone when he was in these interviews with teams. Like, it was a job interview. I wouldn't pull out my phone in a job interview. I wouldn't even take my phone into a job interview. It would stay in my car. But like, these kids are 20. They're 19, 20, 21. They don't know. They've never been through a real job interview, so they don't know any better. And it's like, if you're like, what do you like? Oh, I like Fortnite. I like playing video games. Like, teams are going to get turned off by that, regardless if, Le'Veon Bell and all those guys stream themselves playing video games. Like, the NFL doesn't care, but at the same time, like, if you're a rookie, you'd be like, what are you into? Playbooks.
Yeah, they want robots in the interviews.
Yeah, be the robot in the room. And if he's like, well, that's not me. Well, guess what? That's why you went 59th. You could have went 32, but you didn't because you didn't play the game. Part of it's playing the game. If you don't play the game, it's just how it is.
Yep. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. My co-host Scott Schulte joined us earlier. He had to unfortunately leave early. We're with Cody Toomey.
I will say one thing though too. One of the picks that a lot of people were bagging on was the Mark Walton pick.
That's where I was going next. God, I love that we're the.
You're my spirit animal.
So before you go there,
all right.
Sorry, I gotta plug the show, my friend.
I
gotta let people know how to get the show.
Gotcha.
Unless you want to use your vast social media to plug the show. I got you. So you can get the show on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, CincyJungle.com. We're on all the platforms. You can get in touch with the program at Bengals OBI on Twitter, on Twitter.com, and you can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com.
Subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. Tell us your favorite Bengals pick.
There it is. You know what? I asked about your favorite, least favorite. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all of that with Scott. But my favorite, for a variety of reasons, was Mark Walton. I guess the reason that I thought he was kind of one of my favorites was overall value. I thought running back was a sneaky need for this team. Jeremy Hill left. Cedric Pierman's gone. Alex Erickson didn't do much in the return game his second season after an impressive rookie year.
I don't see a way that Alex Erickson makes this team.
And then you read about Mark Walton, the guy, and what he's been through, and it's like, holy crap, dude! This is a guy that just you want. And even if he kind of ends up being an okay guy or an okay player, then fine. But you want him to succeed. I've heard Darren Sproles type of comparisons. I don't necessarily agree with that.
Or Dion Lewis a lot.
Dion Lewis. That's the one I hear a lot. So your thoughts on Mark Walton? I like Malik Jefferson. I like Billy Price as an immediate starter. But Mark Walton is a sneaky guy that a lot of people – there's a lot of polarizing opinions amongst Bengals fans. That's one of my favorite, if not the favorite pick of this year's draft for the Bengals, that running back.
Yeah, I mean, I think the crazy thing with Walton is I've said before, if I own an NFL team, which I don't, and I was a GM, I would take a running back between rounds 2 and 4, 2 and 5, probably closer to like 3 and 5 nearly every year, especially if the class is deep. Last year's class was deep. This year's class is deep. I'm dipping into these classes because running back's a devalued position. Get a guy like Mark Walton that 5 years ago that he goes top 50 for sure. And he has an injury, so he slides. So he was actually one of 3 guys I tweeted out when they were kind of going through. I said, I think running back's a bigger need than people are talking about. I think it's a pick that they'll make. 3 guys I said were him, John Kelly, and Josh Adams. 3 totally different backs for that reason, right? So he is more like the same as Gio, the same as Mixon. He comes in, nothing changes. Same way with John Kelly, but John Kelly's got a little bit more power than him, a little more size. And then Josh Adams, who ended up going undrafted, which I couldn't believe, was more of like, you want to fill the Jeremy Hill role with a little bit more elusiveness, he's your guy. But he was a guy, I said, if his ankle checks out, I think he'll be on the Bengals radar. And then there he is. I mean, the guy averaged, 5 or 6 yards per play. when he was healthy. And he's a lightning rod, and that's what they want in their offense. They want running backs that don't tip their hand. Now they've got 3 of them. They're in. You don't know if they're going to be passing or running. You don't know if they can split these guys out. And, like, let's be honest, Gio's not getting any younger. Gio's had both of his knees torn up. Gio's owed $6 million next year. Now, it's not like the Bengals to cut him, but if Mark Walton plays well this year, I mean, maybe they try to trade Gio. Maybe they try to get a late pick and move him. I mean, the thing is, I'm not ever giving a running back a second contract unless they are absolutely top 3 running back in the league, because I'm not investing money in a position that I can just draft almost every year and get similar to equal production. Every year, a back like Joe Mixon comes out, pretty much. Not every year, but if you look at this year's draft, guys like Nick Chubb, all these guys that came out, there's almost always one of these stud backs, maybe not to Mixon's level, but like, I'm not paying the money at that position. So I really like the pick. He can up on special teams right away. And running backs get hurt. I mean, I want 3 good backs. You have to have 2. It's better if you have 3. I mean, I don't want Brian Hill getting carries this year. I don't want Cedric Pierman being their special teams guy. So if someone does get hurt, you know he can't make carries.
Remember last year, Cody, at the end of last year, Joe Mixon had a concussion.
Yep.
Giovanni Bernard was in and out of the lineup. Jeremy Hill was done.
Cedric Pierman out there taking snaps.
Yep.
That's giving away downs. When you're handing the ball to Cedric Pierman, you might as well just punt.
Yep, exactly.
Nothing against Pierman, nice dude and long-time NFL special teamer, but
I love that guy.
Thing is a running back.
Yep, love that guy, but it was special teams only, let's be honest.
So I think getting guys that were versatile this year was really key to them, and a lot of the guys can do a lot of different things, and I think that's smart. Especially with a team like this, it doesn't pay that much in the offseason. You've got to get guys that can wear multiple hats.
Yep, and there are so many questions I want to ask you about. I know our time is limited. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get this program on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube. You can get it on CincyJungle.com. You can get in touch with us at BengalsOBI on Twitter and the OBinsider at gmail.com. I don't want to take up too much more time. Cody, there are so many questions I can answer for you, or ask you, actually. You can answer
back.
them.
I can come back. We got time.
I guess I don't even know where to go. What I want to ask, to me, there were a slate of positions for the Bengals that they needed to address this offseason. Linebacker, defensive tackle, offensive line, potentially running back. We just talked about that. Tight end, maybe secondary, all of that stuff. Okay. Backup quarterback. Now, between free agency and the draft, now I know some of these picks or some of these acquisitions, you have to look back a little bit. Matt Barkley, again, backup quarterback. Chris Baker, the very first quote-unquote free agency signing that the Bengals made. Bobby Hart, another early free agency signing the Bengals made. I guess I'm asking there are a number of news outlets. So people kind of close to the Bengals are saying, hey, kind of good draft. They should be competitive this year. All of a sudden you look at like Bleacher Report, you look at some of these other 2019 mock drafts. The Bengals are in the top 5 in terms of where they predict them to finish in 2018 and, who they might take in 2019. I don't see them top 5, but, I mean, is this –
That's a lot of I think it's based on.
Should this be something that we should expect, or is this just kind of knee-jerk reaction?
I think this team has a much higher floor than what people are giving them credit for, because I think what they're going off is the Vegas odds, and Vegas. I mean, people forget that Vegas is about money, right? It's about getting equal money on one side or the other. No one's going to Vegas and hammering the Bengals over. Bengals fans aren't interested in betting in their team, and no random fans are betting on the Bengals. And one of the things they get the least amount of action on is season over-unders, because your money is tied up for 20 weeks, 30 weeks before you get your money back. I mean, if you want to bet a season over-under, you got to bet it now. Your money's held by Vegas. They're drawing interest on your money, and then you don't get it back until week, when the playoffs start. So I think part of it is that the Vegas odds aren't great for them, and that's where people are getting their numbers from. I think their over-under is like 4.5 or 5.5 maybe. But yeah, I mean, I can't see this team losing more than 9 games. Like 7-9, I think, is probably 6-10, probably at worst. I think the thing we have to think about, though, that Vegas may be taking into account, is they don't have a backup quarterback that really is proven to win games. So if Dalton were to go down, he get ugly fast. I mean, like, Matt Barkley, capable, but I don't like Dalton does a lot for this team and he knows this offense, he knows these players, and they rely on him a lot. And if he goes down, they're not beating Pittsburgh, probably not beating Baltimore, probably split with the Browns if they lose him. And then their schedule, I mean, it's not easy. They go on the road 3 or 4 to start, then they close with 3 or 4 on the road. They're at home all summer or all winter in the middle of the year. So, I mean, I think that's where it's coming from. But I think the team somewhere between 7 and 10 wins. That's where I see them.
Yeah, and I look at the
if Cordy's healthy all year and Price plays well at center and they find – the thing is, there's a lot of what ifs. What if Westerman's good? What if Fisher's good? What if Billy Price is great?
What if Ross is great?
What if Ross is great? But it's a lot of what ifs.
What if Eifert is healthy?
Right. If the whole team is healthy, this team can win 12 games. Yeah. No problem. I really think this defense could be elite. And I almost prefer Burfict missing the first 4 games, because then we might get the last 12. I mean,
yeah.
Like when he plays early, it almost seems like he gets dinged up and then he nags an injury all season, as where like when he comes in late,
his tackle form is terrible, right?
Yeah, it seems like he plays a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, I think their defense can be really good, and I think that if the offense is where all the what ifs are, what if John Rush, what if Eifert, what if all those what ifs become yeses, this offense is going to be liquid. I mean, they are just going to be pouring gasoline on this offense, because Ross is crazy good. If Boyd and LaFell are playing in the slot for you, and Malone and Ross are playing on the outside opposite of AJ, you got Eifert in the seam, and you got a capable offensive line. This team and Joe Mixon, running lanes for Joe Mixon's, poo-wee.
Yeah. Brandon Seaman in the YouTube chat says Bengals 9-7 or better. I saw somebody else say 7-9 was the floor. I think it was Zachary Semple. And then Eshket says Bengals 10-6. Zachary followed it up saying, I honestly see us 11-5. Michael Myers 10-6. Royal Flush 5-1-3. I see 11 wins. Michael Myers 10-5-1. Marvin likes his ties. So I see it there. Let's get you out of here, and all of us out of here pretty soon here. There's kind of a 2-pronged question. I've got a couple more questions, but the first one is a 2-pronged question.
Yeah, I got to get running pretty soon, too.
I got you, man. Your concerns about the offensive line, are they quelled with just a Billy Price and the late 7th round addition and who they have on the roster? And, kicker. What do you think about kicker? I mean, they didn't do – for this year, they didn't use a draft pick on him. Is there anyone that maybe could challenge?
Not that's available now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think Jake Fisher, I think he's a pretty good chance of being a good right tackle. I think the heart issue, we talked about it before, I think that's really what's held him back. So I'm going to be optimistic on the traits for him. Right guard worries me, and Cordy Glenn. I think Cordy Glenn will be healthy. It was a bone spur. I don't think it's a huge issue. I mean, anybody can get hurt, but I think he doesn't have like an injury history that worries me. Like Eifert's back. It's not like that where it's like every year he gets hurt in the same area. But that was one of the reasons why I think their late pick of Rod Taylor or whatever was foolish. I think they should have taken a kicker. Eddie Pinheiro was available. Dude, on YouTube, YouTube highlights, guy makes 75-yard field goals. I mean, like, puts it on a tee, makes a 75-yarder. And he was really accurate in college, and now he's with the Raiders because they don't have a kicker. But if you pick him, guess where he has to come? Here. But I think they just didn't. They got burned last year. They felt like they're idiots and had eggs on their face, so they just didn't want to go down that road and have a kicker in here and have another kicking battle. They're just going to roll with Bullock and their 42-yard field goals.
How do you feel that the Bengals have improved themselves in terms of, from, I guess, January, February until now with the free agency, the draft, exponentially, pretty good, or
It's not. It's fine. I just
Yeah.
know either way.
All right, I gotta go, but I think they've done a lot of job improving with both free agency. I think Preston Brown will be a capable pickup with Cordy Glenn, and the draft. I think they've made a pretty substantial improvement. I'd say 20% better than last year. They filled a lot of holes. They didn't really lose much, and they got Eifert back, which I think was big because they didn't make them have to take a tight end in a class that wasn't very good at tight end.
Cody, go tend to your family, my friend. You're the man. I know it's late notice on my end. Anytime you want to come on this program, you're welcome. I appreciate you coming on to this program tonight. Apologize to your wife. Apologize to your family. I'm sorry. It's my fault, my friend. But anytime, you're welcome anytime.
Right.
Thanks for your insight, and hope you enjoyed last weekend, my friend.
All right. Sounds good. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Bye-bye.
This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Again, this is Anthony Cosenza. I was joined earlier by my co-host, Scott Schulte, and by our special guest co-host, Cody Toomey. He had to leave there based on some obligations. But you can get this program on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, CincyJungle.com, and a variety of other means you can get in touch with the program at Bengals OBI on YouTube and the obinsider@gmail.com via email. Thanks so much for everybody tuning in. Thanks so much for everybody submitting your questions. We tried to get them in on a number of different ways. We may not have credited you. I do want to say, I try and I've promoted a couple of different things on this program, for better or for worse. One of which is my the nonprofit endeavor I have started on behalf of my recently deceased sister, the Lisa Cosenza Memorial Scholarship Foundation. And for those of you who read CincyJungle.com, I put a post up last weekend, which was her birthday. I'm sorry, the weekend before that, which was her birthday. And I hope you watched it. I hope you enjoyed it. Got a little bit of an insight to somebody who is a Bengals fan that you may not have met. But there's a listener on this program. I didn't see him live tonight, but his name is Jason Von Stein. And Jason Von Stein apparently is a musician. His father is a musician. Both of them have either collaborated and or shared each other's music. I just want to, I want to make this a platform to share things that our listeners and our followers do. And Jason Von Stein has been somebody that I know has been following this program for quite some time. And he and his father have been, making some music and all of that. If you want to follow him, you can check him out on Twitter. You can check out all the material he has put out there. I will put some things up on the CincyJungle.com post in terms of music that they've done and all of that. So I urge you to connect with Jason. I urge you to watch and or listen to some of the music they've put out there. I think it's quite good, and enjoy it. And at a minimum, it's a fellow Bengals fan who has put out some music, and you can connect with him that way. I do want to point out, even though he is a little bit of a troll of the program, wink, wink, my good friend, personal friend, Wayne Miller, has he's been involved in a number of different bands, a number of different endeavors. He has generously put out, and I hope it's going to be completed over the next couple of episodes, where we can kind of, for those of you who are, who download the audio, I'm hoping to put forth something that has a little bit more of a professional feel in terms of music and all of that. He has graciously helped out with some intro music and all of that, and he is in and out of the music industry. He is pretty popular, especially amongst those who are in the hard rock, metal, alternative rock. He is currently rejoining a band of his called Bleed the Sky. So go check out some of their stuff if you like hard metal. I get it. Maybe not everybody's choice, but he has graciously decided to help out this program with some of his audio and musical talents. So if you are into heavy metal, if you are into hard rock, go check out Bleed the Sky. Go follow Wayne Miller. I don't have it in front of me. I think it's Wayne Miller Guitars or what have you. He's probably going to text me on the side saying, "Hey, what the hell, man?" But go check out his stuff. Good stuff for those who like that genre of music, and you're probably going to hear some of his produced music on this program in the near future. So thank you to him. And I want to say a very special thank you. If I did not do so in the past couple of videos, I want to say a very special thank you to those of you on Cincy Jungle, those of you on Facebook who responded to a post I did about my sister on her birthday. We received a couple more donations and a lot more help, positive comments, all of that stuff, and I greatly appreciate it. I've made sure that my family has seen that, and I want to let you know that it has not gone unnoticed, and we all appreciate it. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for the support of this program. I know a couple of our episodes recently have gone longer than expected, but it's a busy time of year. So hopefully you've enjoyed what we've been putting out there, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our SoundCloud channel, subscribe to the iTunes channel, all of that. Get all of our material, and we will continue to put that out there for you. I'm Anthony Cosenza, for my usual co-host, Scott Schultze, and our guest co-host, Cody Toomey, who had to do some family things at the end there. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed your NFL draft weekend. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.